On today's episode, I'm joined by Boyd Shermis. He's a California winemaker with an extraordinary journey from the music and film industries to crafting exquisite wines. And we're going to explore his leap from the silver screen to the vineyards and unravel the unexpected connections that fuel his passion for winemaking. Hey, Boyd, thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast.
Pleasure to be here.
I appreciate your time. And, just jumping right in, your journey is very eclectic in a very cool way, in my opinion. You started in the music industry, kind of made your way from there into the film world, and now you're sort of knee deep in this winemaking. So I see it as the Hollywood glitz and glamour versus the vineyards, quiet beauty, quite a shift. Can you walk us through this decision-making process and what motivated you to step away from, an illustrious career in the film world and venture into winemaking, with Tomi Cellars?
I'd be delighted to. But first, let me correct a wide-ranging misconception about glitz and glamour of Hollywood. Filmmaking is not glitzy or glamorous when you're actually doing the filmmaking. It's like a traveling circus, and I don't mean that in a negative way necessarily, but you're traveling from location to location. You set up in tents. You might be eating on a plastic chair on a plastic table in a dirt, muddy field. So just to dispel that right away. So it wasn't that big of a shift in that sense. But it's sort of an interesting thing for me in terms of the journey that I took. It wasn't that I was consciously hating what I was doing in film. And frankly, going back a few years prior to that, I wasn't hating music. Quite the contrary. I was loving music and trying to make it in music. It's just that I stumbled into something in the visual effects world and the whole filmmaking world that stimulated my creative juices in much the same way that music did, and sort of satisfied that creative itch that I had along the way. And so it was an easy transition from music to film because I felt very good about it. And like I said, I felt like I was making a transition that came easily to me, and that it satisfied that creative itch. And likewise, the shift to making wine, while it was not, and still is not really, it has been a conscious shift. I'm done with movie making, and now I'm a winemaker. It's been an evolving process. It's just a set of circumstances. I fell in love with wine, and part of I have sort of an insatiable curiosity that served me well through primarily my filmmaking career, in terms of staying on top of all the latest technology and the techniques and learning how to do visual effects, which is not it's not brain surgery, but it's not an easy discipline in the filmmaking world. And so there was just that constant, how do I do this? How am I going to get that done? And how am I going to create this? There's a similar passion for learning and understanding and trying to figure out how one winemaker makes a Syrah that tastes like this, and another winemaker has a Syrah that tastes like that. And how did they do that? And why did that happen? And how did they get there? So it was just this incredible, I'll call it an unhealthy passion to figure that out, that led me away from film. And part of the transition has to do with the fact that over the last, I'll say dozen years or more, 15 years, with the advent of computer graphics, where the challenges in creating visual effects aren't what they used to be. I used to lay awake at night thinking about, oh my gosh, how am I going to create this effect? What if I do this wrong? Is it still going to work? But nowadays, you just kind of know, if you photograph it, and capture the right information while you're shooting it, with enough time and money, you can do virtually anything in the computer. And so the challenges of creating visual effects sort of lost its luster a little bit over the last dozen years or so. Whereas I still lay awake at night now thinking, oh my God, this batch of wine, what's going on? Anyway, that answered the question.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I started myself, I started as a PA. So
Right.
I had the same, my first sort of piece of advice when I was on set was, it's going to be a lot of hurry up and wait. You get everything ready, and then, okay, lighting's not ready, or the actor's not ready, or whatever it might be. And, you know, of course, my parents back home in New Jersey at the time thought it was the coolest job in the world. But for when you're standing there, it's a whole different shift in what seems to be glamorous. But for most people, they think, you know what, it beats my job of, you know, wherever they're doing and being on these productions.
Sure. Yeah. Listen, would I rather be working in a bank? No.
Exactly.
And it isn't literally a traveling circus where you're doing the setting up a ride and doing the same thing day after day. Every single day in the film business is a completely different day, and no two are alike. And that much of it,
Yeah, it keeps you on your toes.
it absolutely does. Every shooting day is different. You know, the crews are usually fantastic, and I absolutely enjoy working in film. It still does make me very happy, and I enjoy the collaboration and you know, spending a lot of people's money. Just the creative satisfaction sort of lost a little luster.
Well, now speaking of these three industries, because I don't want to discount, you know what you've done in music, but is there a thread that maybe connects the music, the film, the winemaking, and any sort of skills or lessons that you picked up during these earlier days in music and in film that maybe unexpectedly align with this passion you found in crafting wine?
It's actually a great question. I mean, the thread, as I see it anyway, you know, in music, I was classically trained in music. And so when you're sitting at the conductor's podium and you're reading a score and you're looking at and listening to 70, 80 different instruments, different unique voices in the orchestra, that you need to look at each one and you need to perceive each one individually and know what that voice is saying or singing, but also to be able to hear it as a whole. And even frankly, just to read it on a piece of paper, on a physical score, you go, okay, I see how that all fits together as a whole. That there was a similar, and I'll even back up and say, dealing with recording arts, which I did quite a bit of as well, where you are recording multiple instruments, very often individually, separately, at different times. So you're recording an instrument, be it guitar, bass, drums, what have you, or trumpets, that you have to hear it as part of a whole, even as you listen to it and record it and lay it down on a track as one. So as shifting then to the film industry, and one of the reasons the film industry became, you know, was an easy transition for me, is that when you're dealing with visual effects, it's very much the same sort of thing, only you're dealing it with the eyes. I used to refer to it very often as music for the eyes, in that we would create one or photograph one specific element, a background, and then we'd photograph a foreground, and then maybe there's another piece, a rocket ship, whatever. But you have to be able to see all those discrete images and how they're going to work as a whole, and know that they're going to work as a whole, be it for lighting, lensing, composition, you know, all those things that go into filmmaking, depth of field, focus, what have you. And then there's this whole transition into wine, which is, I'll say, still an ongoing transition as I still work in film and I'm building up the winery business. But the point is that there are aspects of winemaking that to me are very similar in that I need to, for example, I make different, sometimes blends of different grape varietals, be they Grenache and Syrah, let's take for example, that these are two completely different grapes and they have their own unique flavors and flavor profiles. And frankly, within each grape, there are different strains, different clones we refer to them as. And you might think of it as, using the orchestra analogy, you've got first chair flute, second chair flute, and third chair flute. They're all playing flute voices, but they're all playing something a little bit different, right? And so same thing with grapes. I might have some Grenache, but I might use multiple clones or strains of Grenache and multiple strains of Syrah in this example. And I have to know how ultimately how they evolve in the barrel individually, and how I might use them as a blend when I put them together as a final blend and then go bottle it. So it's that same sort of mindset that you're tracking individual characteristics, or in this case, flavors, flavor profiles, and knowing how it might work with the whole, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my days in music, I never learned how to read and write music, which the basics were there, but I played like pop rock. So it was like,
okay.
You learn your chords and what sounds good when you kind of strum it.
Right.
And that was sort of our process of like getting the songs out there. And I was always envious of people who were cerebral enough to sit there and just take a sheet and just be able to just lay it down, you know. And that was always sort of the limitations for me in music, because you could only go so far as to what you could play, but you couldn't sit there and pick up work as a session guy. That was the sort of thing that was very appealing to me. But it seemed like, when you're a PA at 14 hours a day, trying to then learn music, it just became, too much. So we would play shows and just, 4-chord rocket kind of thing.
Sure. Well, listen,
So,
music is a discipline that requires constant practice. There's an old saying that we used to say in music: if I don't practice for one day, I'll notice the difference in my playing. If I don't practice for 2 days,
absolutely.
if I don't practice 2 days, another musician will notice it. If I don't practice for a third day in a row, everyone will notice it. So yeah, my point being that you really have to have time and be dedicated to the craft of music. Otherwise, it's really hard to make it as a session musician.
It's discipline. It's discipline. It's crazy. It's such an art form. It's something where you can just take that, and with the band stuff too. It's so much ageism, in the industry. You can only you're a certain age, but session, just like who cares? You could just do it forever as long as your motor skills are
I'll
still
tell you
there.
something too. It's probably noted, well documented in Hollywood. There exists some ageism. I mean, I've managed to work into my
Oh
60s,
yeah,
but one of the things about winemaking, there's no ageism in winemaking. You go till you
exactly.
die.
Yeah. Well, almost like country music in a way, right?
Yeah. Okay.
You have
Sure.
these, that's like the one genre I can sort of say it really doesn't matter how old you are. I mean, nowadays you're getting a lot of, cross genres of music influencing there, but for the old style, they're still, going to be timeless. But, speaking of the winemaking, 2 decades you've done, that's very impressive. So like, can you walk us like through the winemaking journey, and like sort of like what's the most significant thing that you've learned over this time that you've been studying?
Sure. So you mentioned it's 2 decades, and that's been the journey. I haven't been making wine for quite that long.
Oh yeah, studying winemaking.
Stunning
Yes,
winemaking. So, and
yes,
really, it
sir.
was somewhat informal to begin with. It started out as just weekends with my spouse Denise, and who's my partner in the winery, and by the way, whose middle name adorns the name of the winery. And it was just weekends because we both work in the film industry, and we don't get the same 2 weeks off or 4 weeks off every year to go have a nice long vacation somewhere. And so it'd just be whenever we had a weekend to get away, we'd crawl up to wine country, be it Santa Barbara or Sonoma or Napa or the Okanagan Valley in Canada, or we've been to areas in New York Peninsula, all that. Anyway, it just became this relatively frequent weekend journey that we would take. And once again, just the more I started tasting, I go, oh my God, this is really interesting. These are all so different, and some are better and some are worse. And I have a favorite saying of mine, of course, and it holds true for many things, not just winemaking, but in order to find the gems, you got to dig through a lot of dirt. So, so I ended up tasting, any number of bad wines in pursuit of the really good wines. But as I would find the good wines, I would try and see if I couldn't speak with the winemaker behind those wines. And naturally, I couldn't do that all the time, or for that matter, very often in the beginning. But whenever I could, I would try and talk to the winemaker and find out, where'd you get this and how'd you get that, as far as the flavor profiles. Anyway, over the years, it was quite literally, she and I just started going every weekend, or sometimes in the middle of the week, if there was there are certain wine stores near our home that would do tasting flights. They would feature the wines of the Rhone Valley in France, or the wines of Santa Barbara, or the wines of Sonoma, Pinot Noir from wherever, Santa Rita Hills. And so we would try and attend as many of these little wine tasting events as we possibly could. Even along the way, finding people similar to us in this endeavor, just this pursuit of finding good wines. I met up with groups of people who then would hold parties, and everyone would bring 2 or 3 bottles of wine. And so if there was 25 people, there'd be 75 wines potentially at any given party that we might attend. And so it was just literally thousands. We'd go to every grand tasting event we could find, thousands and thousands of wines, trying them. And I was documenting along the way. And for the longest time, I had this feed on my Facebook page that was wines we liked. And I had hundreds and hundreds of photos. And of course, that was a small percentage of the ones we tasted. because there was so much dirt that I tasted along the way that it didn't get photographed. And then it was, it was probably 15 years of that. And once again, just this sort of unhealthy passion of trying to understand just where and how and who and why all these different flavor profiles, are out there. How did all these people come up with these different things in terms of wine? And then it got to a point about, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago now, that I just started reading every book I could find on the subject, because I really started to study the physical aspects of winemaking, not just talking to the winemakers and trying to understand their wines, but the actual process. And so I was reading every book I could find, up to and including the curriculum of UC Davis Enology School and all of their microbiology courses and all of that. And, it got to a point after 3 or 4 years of that, if I was going to learn anything more, I decided I just had to start making. I had to physically get my hands stained with wine, and just start making the wine and figuring out how to do it in a physical sense, not just a theoretical sense. Sorry, lighting. And so I hooked up with a winemaker who was one of my favorite winemakers. I approached him, this is going back about 5 years now, and asked him if he would let me come in and be his, what we call a cellar rat, an intern. I wasn't looking to get paid. I just wanted to learn how he physically does it. And of course, he turned me down and said no. Because if he was going to bring on an intern, he told me, he wanted a 25-year-old strapping young man who could lift things and move barrels and all of that.
Oh, yeah. I see the mania.
And again, there's nothing wrong with that, certainly. No ageism there, I don't think. But
no.
But point is that ultimately he said yes. I spent about a year as his cellar intern, cellar rat, like I said, learning how to use the hoses and the clamps and the pumps and the various things that we use. Learn how they sanitize this and sterilize a barrel and clean a barrel, how you stack a barrel, drive a forklift, all those things. And at the end of that first year, we didn't kill each other. We didn't hate each other. In fact, we got along pretty well. And so he invited me to start making wine here in his facility. And he said, listen, if you want to make some, I'll show you where to buy some grapes. I'll show you where to buy some barrels and make some wine back here. And I was like, yes, let's do it. My own wine. And so, that was 2019. I made my very first vintage of wine that I call my own. And now 4.5 years later, half of what's back here in this cellar is Tomi Cellars.
That's incredible. So would you say, this is Ross Rankin, correct?
Ross Rankin, yes.
Yes. So that, obviously he's a master winemaker.
Yes.
So I'm assuming that's obviously quite a sort of a person to be working under to in terms of the learning process and the learning curve that must have come with that. But someone to really keep you on your toes and sort of learning from one of the best, right? So
what was kind of interesting to me about the whole thing, first of all, he's been doing it, for 20, 25 years, something like that. He's got a loyal following of wine drinkers, wine buyers. But what was interesting to me is that, as I mentioned, I've been studying sort of all the latest and greatest techniques from UC Davis, which is down to the DNA and the microbiology of everything involved in winemaking. Whereas Ross, who's been doing it for 20 some odd years, 25 years, he's all gut and feel and taste.
Wow.
And it's not that he ignores chemistry, but it's not he doesn't rely on chemistry in any particular way. And like I said, it's all just by taste and by instinct. And so I came in all gung-ho, yeah, we got to analyze this and analyze that. And he's like, no, kid, we just got to taste it and see if it's good. So for me, it was, bringing all this latest and greatest technology, but then tempering it with just old school, just taste, just smell it. You could see if something's going off or something's, tasting good or right, or when it's ready, you just know it by taste. And so it was this, tempering my enthusiasm of trying to bring all this technology into it. I brought a spectrophotometer in and all kinds of tools. And he's like, yeah, we don't need that. We'll just, it needs a little SO2. So,
It's almost like sports, right? You ever watch Moneyball or one of those movies where
right.
analytics play such right. And then you have these old school managers in baseball like Bruce Bochy or something. They're like, you know what? This is what it feels. The old style. I'm gonna just throw this guy in because my guts tell me he's going to be the best hitter, right? And then you have the computers telling you, no, 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 this guy's lined up here, right field, the sunlight, right?
Right.
You need this bat, right? So it just, but sometimes when you blend the two, there's room for both, right?
I
And you kind of
absolutely,
need both.
and it's really been this great synergy between our two approaches to it. And obviously he's been doing it much longer than I have, and so I defer to him in almost any situation. But there have been times, and he'll be freely admitting it if he were here with us, that that I'll come and go, no, I think we ought to check it, and they go, yeah, you were right. Well, let's adjust that. So, but I pretty well defer to him on almost anything still. Although, having said that, since that first vintage in 2019, that he was very generous in helping me get started and to help me make those. I did a Syrah and a Merlot that year. That since then, I've sort of been making my own wines and doing it in my own styles and doing my own thing. And he kind of just looks over my shoulder and, I might say, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that.
If it were me.
If it were me, I wouldn't do that. But he otherwise, he's let me spread my wings and do my own thing. And I've been very happy with the results that way.
Well, if you had to pick like your most valuable lesson that you've learned from him and how maybe that shaped your approach to winemaking, would it be sort of the gut feel or something else?
Well, boy, there's any number of things I learned from him over the years, and I can't say that one's more valuable than the other. Because the truth is, with winemaking, you screw up one little thing, and the whole batch could just go sour. And and it might be for any number of different reasons. But I think maybe that the biggest thing is just kind of trust your gut, trust your nose, trust your palate. And that was maybe the biggest single thing. But short of that, I'll just say sanitary. Everything has to remain sanitary, clean, 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 constantly clean. Because the worst thing for wine is to get bad bacteria into the wine, volatile acidity, what they call acetobacter. And just getting the wine contaminated is the worst thing that can happen. So 90% of what we do around here is just cleaning.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That whole the gem in the dirt sort of analogy, right?
Uh-huh.
It kind of reminds, could apply to music as well.
Yeah.
Not many,
Very true.
a lot of dirt,
Mm-hmm.
not many gems. But speaking of like that, the sanitary sort of brings up the business side, right? So winemaking can be an art form, but there's also the business side. And, how do you balance like sort of the creative passion where you just want to say, you know what, this is what I feel, this makes me happy, this, right? But the practical aspects of running that successful brand, how do you sort of, balance the two?
Okay. Well, first of all, I'll suggest there might be a couple of different measures of success. There's certainly
Of course.
profitability, and that's probably what most people think of. I have other different values for success alongside profitability. And for what it's worth, I'm now 4 years or 4.5 years into what I'll call an 8-year plan to get to real profitability and beyond just profitability to where I can really start making money at it. So it's not as though that was my goal. Number one, first year, got to make money. I was very pragmatic and had a very long-term view of what financial success might look like in the winemaking business. And it's not an easy business. And you're right, there are completely different disciplines between the winemaking itself and I'll say the art of selling wine. And I don't think of it in terms of, car salesman, but it is two different things. And frankly, I'm a one-man band. I occasionally get a friend or a family member to help bottle or help do this or do that. But I literally do everything from sourcing the grapes to making the wine by hand, bottling the wine, designing the labels, talking to the printer to make the labels, and then putting on the labels, et cetera, all the way down to the tasting room now where I go and try and sell the wine. And what makes it really easy for me, first of all, I love this whole idea that I'm making wine and trying to then sell this product. And I hate the word product even, frankly, but try to sell this wine that I've made, this little baby I created, and I don't try and convince anybody that they should buy this wine. That isn't how I do it. The way I do it is, and I tell people this straight up, look, I make wines that I want to drink, and I just hope somebody else wants to drink it too. But the way I approach it in terms of the sales, it's not, it's a completely different discipline. It's a different, I'll say, personality almost. And it's not that I'm being fake in the tasting room, but there's another facet of my own personality that is, okay, I just spent 3 years making that wine. That was one side of me. Now there's another side of me that is, I just spent 3 years making this wine. I want to pour for you. I want to tell you everything about it. I want to tell you why it tastes the way it does, where the grapes are from, what kind of oak barrels I use. And I'm just genuinely really excited to be able to express to people what I put into that wine and why it tastes the way it does, and educate them in many of the ways that I was looking for all those years, those 20 some odd years that I was on my journey and trying to understand. The first thing I do is try to help people understand why these wines taste the way they do and how I managed to achieve what I achieved in that bottle. And I'm genuinely very, very excited to express that to anybody who will listen to me. And so when people come into the tasting room, it's a really easy thing for me to do it. And I don't lose energy. I don't get, I don't feel like, oh, no, I got to go sell it. I made it. Now I have to sell it. It isn't, it literally isn't that at all. It's like, I get to sell it. Okay. I get to talk about it. And I get to drink a little as I'm telling them, and they get to drink a little. And, expressing everything that I know about the wines, which is in certain cases, a 4-year journey for any given wine, or it might be a 1-year journey for a given wine. But there's very unique things about each and every wine that I'm just excited to tell people about it. And it makes the sales part of it that's much easier.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't, mean to insinuate success is, measured of profitability only. People, pure happiness could be your level measure of success. And for a lot of people, it's like, that's infinitely more important than, right?
Yeah. And there's certainly my happiness. I'm very, very happy doing all of this. I mean, it's harder physical work than I've done in 45 years. I literally evolved in the film business rather, to a place where all I do is sit and point and go, yeah, I wouldn't do that if I were you. No, here's what
like
I
Ross.
think you should.
No, I'm kidding.
No, but there are, in terms of doing visual effects in the film business, I don't touch the cameras. I don't touch the lights. I'm quite literally not allowed to touch anything by union rules.
Union, yeah.
But what I am able to do is talk to the director of photography and go, yeah, if I were you, I would do this. I wouldn't do that. I would do this, because it's your name going on the movie as a director of photography.
True.
If you want this visual effect to look any good, here's what I think you should do. And I kind of approach it that way. But the point is that I don't physically do anything in the visual effects in filmmaking, whereas in winemaking, I work my butt off harder than I have since I was 22 working in a warehouse. Everything, literally everything here. But I love every second of it, number one. So I don't want it to sound like a complaint. I'm working the hardest that I have in many years and loving every moment of it. And that part of it makes me happy, physically, personally happy. So that measure of success, I feel great about it. There is that measure of success with regard to the wine itself. If I've made a great wine, what I consider to be a great wine, and again, I do it for myself. And by the way, everybody's palate is different, and you may not enjoy the wines I make, and I understand that, and I don't get offended if you don't. But that's the first thing I say is, I've made this for me. I'm hoping you like it. But the point is that measure of success, if I have created a fantastic wine that I really, really like, I have succeeded in that sense. And then, of course, there is that financial success where, I'm able to sell it at a profit, and obviously at this stage, still pumping it back into everything. But ultimately, within the next 3 or 4 years, I hope and expect, if current sales chart trajectories, mean anything, that I will reach profitability and even be able to pay myself a little something.
No, I get that. Well, okay. So speaking of that, right? Say someone's listening now, and maybe they're fascinated with the idea of like, hey, I want to start my own brand, regardless of how old they are or their path in life, whatever it might be. What would be the first piece of advice you would give them to sort of start navigating this industry? I know you're in Buellton,
right,
but in terms of wherever they are in the world, what sort of piece of advice do you think you could share with them just getting started?
Well, I think I would just want to tell them, make sure it's something you are incredibly passionate about, because it is very hard work. It does involve, if you're doing it certainly the way that I'm trying to do it, it involves a fairly large financial investment over several years. And I'm not going to give you figures here and now, but
No, I'm sure it's
but
different.
it's not an insignificant financial investment to get started as a winery. Barrels are $1,400 a piece. Number one, the grapes can, if you're getting the really good ultra premium grapes, they're $7,500 a ton. So anyway, forgetting those numbers, just make sure that you're genuinely passionate about doing it and that you have a willingness to wait. This is one of the things that visual effects taught me early on in the visual effects career of mine. It's everything takes forever. And wines, if you want a really good red wine, for example, it takes years to age before it's ready. White wine takes a year. I mean, it's not something. Now there are people who do it on an industrial scale, and they don't spend the kind of time I do to age a wine in a barrel like this. But the point is that there's an investment in time, there's an investment in money, there's a huge investment in energy if you do it the way that I've done it, certainly. And then you just need to be prepared for that. I mean, Ross quite literally tried for the first 2 years to talk me out of it. That was almost every day he'd say, don't do it. Don't do it. You're not going to be, don't do it. And, I just had to ignore him because I had a passion for doing it. So I think if you don't have that fire in you that really, really drives you to do it, and you otherwise just think to yourself, oh, it'd be so cool to have a winery. Yeah, I think I want to have a winery. Don't do it for those reasons. Do it because you really want to invest your own time, your money, your patience. Yeah, that's my advice.
Yeah, it's not like starting a blog. You just need your browser and
Right.
an
It's not
internet
that simple.
connection.
It really is.
Yeah.
You need space. And there's a lot of equipment investment. That's the other huge thing. You need a place. And frankly, you want to be around other winemakers who offer advice. And not, Ross is one of many winemakers who have been generous enough to give me their time and their advice. And so you want to be in a place where you can get that. I don't want to say supervision, but just get that input, where people can say, hey, you sure you want to do that?
Yeah, some mentorship maybe.
Yeah, a little bit. Sure.
Anyone can use that in getting started anywhere, but obviously each industry is different.
Right. And the thing is that the payoff, or rather the risks, if I spent $7,500 a ton on grapes and then I put it in a $1,400 barrel and I've sat on it for a year and a half or 2 years and then I do something stupid and ruin it all, that's quite an investment, not just time or not just money. You look at that future sales potential, it could be $20,000 you just flushed down the toilet. So literally. So, you want to be in a place where, you can get that sort of mentorship and you can get that advice and that you have access to all the tools and resources that you need. Because there's a lot goes into all of this.
Yeah. And you did mention, a couple times that, you're 4.5 years so far into this, 8-year journey, right? And it's clear that, you're evolving, you're pushing boundaries, you're learning the tricks of the trade as you go, sort of tailoring things to what maybe makes sense to your wine and your style, your approach as you go. The winery is growing. You're at the tasting room. You're meeting customers, learning from Ross. What do you see as your vision for the next 4 years, and how you see things evolving and the legacy you hope to sort of leave behind as you expand your production? Is that the goal, and continue to push forward?
Well, certainly expanding production, yes, that's something I've been doing each and every year and continue on paper at this point, project to do that over the next 3 to 4 years. My goal is to get it to nominally 2,000 case production per year. I've sort of figured out on paper that that's a place where I can be fairly, profitable and actually make some money at it. So I've set that as a target and have on paper, once again, scheduled out for the next several years to increase production nominally 30% each year until I hit that target. And, I've sort of been tugging with the idea. We're in Buellton, and we're in our sort of I'll call it a co-op environment, where the big expensive machines are shared by 4 or 5 different winemakers, and we all sort of share these common areas where we do a lot of the cleaning and that sort of thing. But we each have our own separate aging space, cellar space, and we do things our own way. It's just we share some of the bigger expenses. What I've been contemplating, and Denise and I both have been contemplating, is the potential of moving this all from Buellton in the Santa Barbara County, Santa Ynez Valley area, up to Paso Robles. So that's one of those things that vision-wise, where do I see it in the next however many years? That's one of the things that we're contemplating very seriously, is moving the operation up there. And the reason for that is, first of all, Santa Barbara, beautiful vineyards, some of the best in the world, literally voted in 2021 the wine growing region up in the world for that year. It gets a lot of business. The difference between Santa Barbara and Paso Robles, however, and your listeners may not care about this, but Santa Barbara as a wine growing region is adjacent, Santa Ynez Valley as a wine growing region is adjacent to Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara is very much a tourist destination for a variety of reasons. One of them being, of course, winemaking. And so a lot of people will come to Santa Barbara area or the Solvang area just north of Santa Barbara with the intent, we're going to go on vacation in Santa Barbara and maybe we'll do some wine tasting. Versus people who go to Paso Robles, you only go there if you want to do your wine tasting. If you're a serious wine taster, or just somebody who really appreciates wine, or you want to go find some excellent wine to buy and bring home, that's about the only reason you go to Paso Robles. And it's a very popular wine destination. It's very wine centric. And so, it's a little bit different of an attitude, for the people who come visit our tasting room. Now, it's not to say that we don't get some very serious buyers here. We absolutely do. But I'll say the percentage of people who do come into the tasting room aren't always, I'm here to find the best wine and I'm going to buy a case of wine to bring home. It's more like I said, we're on vacation and we thought, we might do some wine tasting. So there is that part of our vision that might take this entire operation up north. I'm trying to expand production to the point where it's big enough that I can generate, some genuine profit and actually pay myself, but not so big that I can't manage to do it all myself still. Now, that's not to say that I don't have visions of hiring a few people to help me, but if I can't manage and personally look after each and every batch and ultimately barrel and then finally bottle of wine that I'm going to open up and pour for somebody, if I can't keep track of every step of that journey for each of those bottles of wine, then it's too much, and I'll back off the volume of wine production that I'm doing.
Now, see, that's to me is very interesting, because it sounds like you want to make sure the quality, like you said, one little thing you do can ruin the entire batch, right? So you want to have that sort of hands-on assurance for your customers that you're overseeing every single bottle they're purchasing, right?
Yeah. And listen, there are winemakers that I know in the region, some right next door, who got into the business and within 2 years managed to have a contract for 10,000 cases selling on the East Coast some orange wine. And they do it in a hack way. They do it sort of in an industrial way, very large scale industrial process where they're not really paying attention to what's going on. And I'm sure they're making a ton of money selling a ton of wine to a ton of people somewhere on the East Coast or wherever. That's not why I'm doing this. It isn't. I'm not trying to grow this into the next Gallo or, any of these large, giant corporate winemaking operations. That isn't the reason to get into this for me. I do want to, like I said, I want it to be sustainable, self-sustaining, that is. But it's really about making excellent wine that I can be proud of and that people really want to come back to me year after year and buy from me.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So my final question is, where can people find your wine? Do you have, what's your website? And I'll put it in the show notes, of course, because I want, obviously, you to be able to see, and I can't wait to try it myself. But where can people find you?
Sure. Well, our website, www.tomicellars, TOMICELLARS.com. And you can find the wine on the website. And we do have our tasting room here in Buellton. It's at 140 Industrial Way, Suite D2, here in beautiful Buellton, California. So we'd sell direct to consumer through the tasting room and or on the website.
Perfect. So people can place orders on the website
Absolutely.
and get them shipped
Yeah, we ship
nationwide?
virtually every state. Sometimes it has to go through a broker, but we have ways to do that.
Perfect. Okay, great. Thank you so much for the time today, and perhaps we could schedule another one, another podcast as things progress, and check in and see how
Yeah.
things are going. Right? If you're up for it, I would love to do that, and I certainly appreciate your time. Enjoyed hearing your story, and I will make sure that I am in line to try your wine because we can't wait to try it.
Yeah,
And
we're going to ship some out to you. I just got to get your address.
right. And, well, thank you so much again for your time today. And we will make sure there's the websites in the notes, and we will check in again. Thank you again for sharing your story today, Boyd. I appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure, Joe. Thank you for having me today. And, if you're truly interested in following up, be it 6 months
Absolutely.
or a year and a half down the road, whatever. We're about to jump into harvest season, which is a crazy time for us. It's sort of a 24/7 operation for about 3 to 4 months. Anytime you want to get back and check in and just see how we're doing, I'd love to talk to you again. That'd be great.
That'd be great. I appreciate that, and we certainly will. And you have a great rest of your day.
All right. Cheers. You too.